some significant email activity thwarting their intent, they decided to table it till May 6th, and they're going to have a workshop on May 1st to have some more discussion about how they might move forward. So it was a good reprieve. We'll see what can get done here in the end.
Are they tabled the whole ordinance or just the real estate part?
They actually did approve one section of it. I guess it's just putting the emergency management thing, keeping the emergency ordinance in place, but not modifying it. We're going to do a short-term.
See if it works.
A couple other
size. Put it over your ears.
Interesting. I shared Owen Tyler, who's our state president, and I were talking about this on Saturday. There were, I think, 15, maybe 20 properties on Folly that were under contract already, and I asked Owen to let the town administrator know, because it's better when a local communicates this stuff. But those people have a vested property interest once that contract's been signed. And for the town to say you can't come and see the property that you have an ownership interest in is just subjecting the town to possible lawsuits. And it's a fine line we have to walk between safety and individual property rights. But you know, they were looking at more than a 30-day emergency order, which they don't have the legal authority to do anyway. I think a lot of these coastal towns that have impacted, particularly short-term rentals, are going to find themselves on the wrong end of some class action lawsuits in the next few weeks.
Yeah,
not led by us, not led by realtors, but by property owners that have
Sure.
lost their summer incomes.
All right. Well, we're a couple minutes after 10. We're a little over 300 people now, so they're gonna continue to come in, but we're gonna go ahead and get started. So we were just chatting ahead of time. So if you just joined in, you didn't miss anything. And we're gonna go ahead and get started, and I'll ask Les to start us off with a prayer. Les.
Let us pray. Lord, thank you. Thank you for another day. Thank you for the opportunity to serve those in our community, to provide for their needs. Father, we ask for your patience in this time of uncertainty, and that we ask that you provide that direction, that leadership that we need, Lord, to make it through these times. Lord, we pray for those that are in leadership. We pray for those that are working on the front lines. We ask for your support. Be with us now, Father. Strengthen us. All in your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Thanks, Les. I appreciate that. We'll also spend a second on gratitudes. If you want to type those into the chat box, since we've got several hundred people and need to keep everybody muted. I would echo Les's thoughts on gratitude for, what I consider to be all those people that are allowing us the luxury to social distance or work from home and do a lot of the things we need to do. First responders and medical professionals, but also grocery store workers and truck drivers and delivery people and people that are really keeping our lives moving forward, giving us the luxury to work from home and social distance and do all those things, putting themselves at risk, again, for us. So I just was grateful for that. We've talked a lot about gratitudes, and we don't have the time on this call to go through those again, but there's no shortage of things to complain about. There's no shortage of difficulties in our everyday lives, and especially right now. But when we consciously take a moment to either in writing or out loud express those things we are grateful for, it really is powerful and important, and I think something that we all need to do on a daily basis. Want to talk a little bit about a reminder from last week. Last week we talked about a quick update for those. Leo is enjoying riding his bike very much. He has told me he did not know what he was missing, and at a young age, that's your first taste of freedom. So now he can go more than 10 feet from home under his own power. So he's very excited. Last week we did talk about what you have in common with Dennis Rodman and what it takes to be a good rebounder. Remembering you've got to have a desire to pursue the ball. You've got to maintain appropriate balance. You have to establish a good rebounding position. You must be able to box out your opponent. Make sure you time your jump and secure the ball after every rebound. And we are seeing some signs of that, and we're going to continue to talk about that, of kind of some of the things we're seeing in the market and things to be important. Wanted to start just a couple of trivia questions on the market, and doesn't really matter the answer, but I think the question is not so much what the real answer is, but what your clients probably think it is. And as we've talked about a lot, every market, but especially this market, gives you an amazing opportunity to be that expert for your clients, to let them know what's going on, not only in the market as a whole, but maybe in their neighborhood, in their town, and even with regard to the price point they're in, because people think things in many cases are a lot worse than they are. And I think if we ask our clients two questions, first one, just as a general thing, how far from the all-time high do you think the stock market is? I think a lot of people would say a lot worse than down 15%, which is where it is now before today's potential rally. That doesn't mean we're not going to have ups and downs, but I think the average person on the street would think things were a lot worse than at this point of down 15% in the stock market. And if you ask them, just looking at last week compared to the same week last year, how far down do you think home sales are? I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't get answers of 30 or 40 or 50%. And last week, market-wide, the answer would have been 13%. So I think it's important for us to continue to communicate with our clients so they know the reality of what's out there. We've always talked about this. When the newspaper runs an article that talks about showings are down, but sales are up, and because of super tight inventory, there are other reasons that showings are down. That's a great opportunity and reason to reach out to your clients. I know you may have seen showings are down, and that may have worried you as you've been doing X, but I wanted to let you know that with super low inventory or other things, showing isn't reflective of activity in the area you're looking at, and here's what we're seeing. Again, it gives you a great opportunity to be that expert as we communicate with our clients. Looking at a couple of real numbers, kind of to flush some of those things out. Showings have certainly picked up. They've gone from down 55% 3 weeks ago to down 38% 2 weeks ago, and now we're probably in the roughly down 30% range. Dave Sansom was giving us those numbers this morning and made a good point that while we love people moving to Charleston, while we know everybody doesn't find a home on their first home buying trip, there are a lot of people that can come to Charleston from time to time and think they might want to move here one day and go see 5 or 6 houses, or somebody who may be looking to move in a year or two and go see a couple of houses. You guys have all shown them houses at one time or another, and they're certainly not looking right now. So just because showings are down 30%, that's not reflective of overall buying activity, because again, your non-serious buyers are the first ones that are out. Also, lots of showings are happening outside of showing time. So lots of virtual showings, lots of, can you send me a video of the home and things like that, that necessarily aren't being set up through showing time, which is where those measured numbers come from. And so we need to make sure that we know that we're going to have a little bit of a new normal as to how things might be measured. And I think pending contracts are going to be a much better gauge of what's going on than showings. Pendings, which is what I just talked about, are even better. Over the last 3 weeks, down 34% 3 weeks ago, down 28% 2 weeks ago, and down 13% last week. Now, those are year over year, same week of April of the prior year. So April of 19 versus April of 20. That puts The month down about 26% this April 2020 over April 19. Again, that's a lot. That's a quarter of the sales. But at the same point a month ago, if you had told many of us that sales would be down 25% in April, I think many of us would be very, very happy with that. We've been on several calls with companies around the country, and everyone is ranging from Michigan, where sales are down 90+%, as real estate was not deemed essential, to places where sales are down 30 and 40 and 50%, with the exception of maybe Iowa. I think of the markets I've talked to, we are in some of the best shape of anyone, and certainly glad and blessed to have that. Last week, 352 properties went under contract, so that's important. Pendings for MLS are down 26% for the month, so I just said that a minute ago. The good thing, and again, I did absolutely none of this work. As a company, we are down 17% in our pending sales for the month over last year. So the activity and engagement that each of you all are doing with your clients on an ongoing basis. I've always said, there's lots of different ways to do real estate, and one of them is not right and one of them is not wrong. They're just different philosophical ways in which you do business. And we've certainly committed to and invested in a relationship-based selling business with high engagement and communication and outreach with our clients. And in this kind of environment, that pays off even more. Yesterday, accounting processed 33 pendings and 30 closings just in a day. And then lastly, as you look at these different signs, even for example, property management, showings on their vacant properties, 2 weekends ago, they had 10 showings on their handful of vacant properties that they have. This last weekend, they had 34 showings on people looking for things to rent. So things are definitely improving. It does not mean we're not going to see additional challenges, that we're not going to see localized challenges. John talked about Folly Beach at the beginning of this and some ordinances that they're looking at and discussing, and there are going to be impacts on certain localized markets, certain price points. Last time I looked, a vast majority of showings were sub $400,000. So there are obviously going to be lots of challenges along the way, but we're certainly encouraged by what we currently see, and it's certainly a lot better than I thought we would have seen if you'd asked me my predictions a month ago. I thought it was also interesting, and then we're going to get to Nick, to look at a couple of different things. I was reading the other day that this outbreak is impacting tens of thousands of people. Parents were frightened to let their children go outside. The economic impact was huge. Travel and commerce between cities were restricted. Public health officials imposed quarantines designed to separate and restrict the movement of people so that they wouldn't be exposed to others who became ill. And I read that, and it wasn't talking about coronavirus. It was actually talking about polio back in the 1950s. And today, polio is eliminated. It was eradicated in the Northern Hemisphere in the 70s. Because again, it was something that was scary and frightening, and even more so it has impacted children. Actually, the March of Dimes was originally created with the goal of curing polio. But today, medical science moves at the speed of light compared to what it did in the 50s. And they can do things with computers and science in hours that would have taken months. And so as the medical community works on vaccines and tests and other things that will help protect us from this, and while it is unique to certainly modern day challenges, it is things that we have been through before, that we have overcome before, and that we will overcome this as well. But I think it's interesting to see some of the parallels, challenges, and know that, there have been times like this before, and that together as a society, as a medical community, we will come through it. But it is interesting to read some of that stuff from the past. I want to welcome and thank Nick Kremydas for being here. Nick's the CEO of the South Carolina Association of Realtors. I think, Nick, I want to first thank you for the guidance, leadership, and excellent communication that I think you all have done through this, especially with regard to both the various relief packages. Many times we've talked on this town hall about referring people really to the state association guidelines on this program or that program, because you guys have done a great job keeping your members informed. I've also personally enjoyed the town hall meetings with whether it's Joe Cunningham or Tim Scott or Lindsey Graham. And I think those are great things that have come out of some of this that maybe we'll continue to do in the future as a chance to kind of talk to some of our elected leaders and one another on some of those topics. So I think Les is going to unmute you, or you can unmute yourself, and I appreciate you being here. What I was going to ask, Nick, is probably just kind of a general question in the beginning that, you know, when things are cruising along, maybe some of the first quarter of 2020, which is amazing to say that, maybe necessarily the people on this call don't either understand, or maybe even just, nothing wrong with that, fully appreciate some of the things they get from their state association. But, you know, when things are more difficult and when they're looking to you guys in leadership for that guidance, I think it certainly is readily apparent to everybody. But I wanted you maybe give you a chance to communicate. We've got, you know, 370 people on the call, to maybe give them some insight as to what you guys have been busy working on through this crisis, other than kind of what I talked about, but also maybe what you guys see as the, you know, the duty and the roles, the association, and the role you guys hope to play through some of this.
Sounds great. Thank you, Michael. And I'm very honored to be invited today. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to our conversation this morning. I was fully expecting to see John Settle in a full kind of Grizzly Adams beard, but I see that John apparently has access to razors during the crisis. So good to see you, John, and everyone else. It's, you know, we've, in a sense, even though we're further apart, I feel like we've never been more connected than we have over the last 4 weeks. We have, and then you scratch your head and wonder, well, what are the takeaways from this? What are the positives that we can use to translate into the future, the next steps of the association and our businesses? But before I get to that, let me, you know, backtrack a little bit. As Michael was saying, you know, we finished 2019. It was a year for the record books, right? One of the best years ever in South Carolina for real estate transactions, volume closed. It was an amazing year. And 2020 was started on the same foot. And then late February, early March, we started hearing these rumblings of this virus spreading in California and New York. And suddenly, early March, we are canceling meetings, rescheduling events, and wondering exactly how much is this going to impact South Carolina. So as your state association staff, Lindsey Jackson, who's our chief lobbyist, our attorneys, Austin and Byron, our communications team, our member service team, we all kicked it into high gear. To be honest, when this thing first hit, we knew we had to do something, but we didn't know exactly what that something was. And I told my staff, number one, we are going to communicate. And we're going to find new avenues and new ways to make sure that our members understood the nuances of everything that Congress was doing and everything that was happening in South Carolina. So one of the first trends we identified early on were states that were closing businesses as a response to the coronavirus. And in many cases, those states and even local governments were using a list. You may not know this, but the Department of Homeland Security has a list of what they determine to be essential services. And I think Dave actually sent me that list early on in this. And we realized that the Department of Homeland Security did not have real estate as an essential service. Well, guess what? Today, that Homeland Security list does have real estate as an essential service, thanks to our efforts in communicating that to our national staff who lobbied and got that added to the list. Now, what did that mean for South Carolina? We wanted to make sure that our members were able to provide the essential service of housing during a critical time where shelter in place is pretty meaningless if you don't have shelter. And we were able to communicate with the governor, with local governments, the need for shelter during this time. Think of how many clients you've had just in the last month that have gone through a major life change, a divorce, death of a spouse, they're in an abusive relationship, and they need immediate housing, whether it's rental or single family. There is an extreme need for housing in every type of situation, in every type of market. And we communicated this need. The sell of this message was not difficult, but it was important to make it front and center. There were communities that we talked to that didn't understand why we needed to have cleaning crews going into communities to clean rentals and other houses and apartments and things. They didn't understand all the nuances of what it means to be in the real estate business. Why do the deed recording offices have to be open? You know, why should we allow a title abstractor to do a title search? Why is that important? Why does an attorney need to be present at a real estate closing? We had addressed a number of these questions and working with our local associations, your team at CTAR, Will Riley, your government affairs director, Josh Dix, were front and center in all of these communities that, you know, they weren't trying to harm real estate. They were trying to protect their citizens, their taxpayers, the public. And as is often the case, when you have good intentions, sometimes there are some impacts that you just don't foresee. And so,
Nick,
yeah.
You know, I think that's a huge lesson for people because, you know, unfortunately what we see on the news when you use the term lobbyist or you use the term lobbying is, you know, somebody that may have done something they shouldn't have done or paid a bunch of money and gotten themselves a bridge to nowhere or gotten their community something maybe that wasn't essential or they didn't otherwise deserve. And I think one of the points that Nick's making is that, and when we've always talked about RPAC and Maria Woodall said now's a great time to invest in RPAC, and I know Michael Sally and Nell Postel and lots of members inside our company have been really involved in RPAC and we're a supporter as well. But what I think people forget is that, you know, at its core, what our government liaisons do, what lobbyists, even if that's a bad term, do, is really help educate our leaders. And they don't necessarily know how every industry is run. They don't know that something that might sound innocent, like closing an RMC office, shuts down someone's ability to, you know, move into a home that they have pending and all of the domino effects that have in that. And so it's really, you know, us having those people that are helping educate our leaders on your behalf and on our industry's behalf. And, you know, not only in my role, but, you know, on behalf of each of you guys, you know, I don't think we would have wanted to see where we would be in the conversations we'd be having if they hadn't been successful in doing that.
Yeah. And, you know, there are in New York City, for example, a real estate agent cannot text or call a client. They cannot, certainly can't conduct any kind of real estate business, but they can't even text or call a client in New York. There's no solicitation allowed whatsoever. And Michael's absolutely right. A lobbyist is not, well, it is kind of a negative connotation in most cases, but we often get labeled as a special interest. I wear that label with pride because you know what our special interest is? It's investing in real estate. it's home ownership, it's protecting private property rights. And those three things go hand in hand with promoting healthy, strong, vibrant communities that are attractive, that are growing in a smart, sustainable way, that promote environmental concerns and improve the quality of life for our citizens. That's what we do as an association. That's the bottom line. And that means that we have to work with Democrats and Republicans. We can't afford to be a partisan organization. And I know we all have our personal politics. And I'm not going to try to tell you this person is great or that person is bad. But in politics, these issues that we've addressed with the governor's office, with local and city councils across the state, were because we made friends before we needed them. If I picked up the phone and called Mayor Darby, and I did not have a prior working relationship with her, she would not have taken my call. We would not have talked about the impact of short-term rentals on her community. She would have put me off to a staff person at best. And making those relationships is what makes us successful as an association. We're working on, we had the CARES Act that came through. About 10 billion of the original 340, whatever that was, went to the real estate sector nationally. I've got the numbers for the EIDL, the loans in South Carolina specifically. About 140 million was provided to South Carolina businesses under the EIDL program. I don't have the numbers on PPP yet. The programs were refunded. They relaunched yesterday. And guess what? There was so much demand, everything crashed. They had to reset everything. The feds told the banks, you can only lend X amount of money because we want to make sure some of the smaller businesses get access to it. They're going to make some of the companies that are publicly traded repay their PPP loans. Not necessarily make them give it back right away, but they won't be forgivable for those companies. And so
I did hear Secretary Mnuchin say this morning, Nick, that any loan over, I think, 2 million would undergo a complete SBA audit before there would be any forgiveness, to make sure they were protecting taxpayer money, so that even if some things did get out to companies that had other access to capital markets or do come back sooner, like the LA Lakers, who have since repaid their PPP money, that there would be some oversight on that. But at the same point, even in the first round, money went out to small businesses employing 30 million people. So yeah. I don't want us ever to get caught up in, a handful of bad actors that made their way around Facebook, whether it was Ruth Chris or Shake Shack or other people that still have employees that still needed help and that they were laying off, but probably had access to the capital markets in other ways.
Right, absolutely. So without getting too far in the weeds on the CARES, certainly if we have time, I'll try to answer a few questions, but we've got, I believe this next round of funding will run out before the end of the week. The demand is so strong. I don't think Congress is going to put any more funding on the table until maybe late June or July, when they see the impact that this has had, and as states start to reopen for business, what that impact is going to have on the economy. They are going to address, I think, a few policy issues, particularly in regards to commercial landlords that are being hammered under the current programs because they basically don't have much relief at all. Our big issue that we're working with the governor's office right now is to try to address remote notary, the ability to remotely notarize documents. It's one of the few remaining barriers we have to establishing a fully a digital real estate transaction. Congress is also looking at remote notary legislation as well. A little bit closer to home, the governor has appointed a real estate, he's appointed a task force called Accelerate South Carolina, whose purpose is going to be to establish guidelines on how to reopen South Carolina. The governor extended his emergency orders until May the 12th. I believe that's going to be his last extension, particularly in regards to the work or home order that he's implemented. And we're going to see a slow roll of businesses are being allowed to open. Things like, restaurants being allowed to reopen at 25% capacity for a few weeks, and then bump that up to 50, and then it gradually back up to 100. But it's important that we had a voice on this Accelerate Task Force. And I love, Michael Sally knows I love to say this, if we don't have a seat at the table, we're going to end up on the menu. And the governor appointed Tyler Servant. Tyler Servant is a realtor from Myrtle Beach, and Lee Hewitt, who is a realtor from Georgetown. Also, Lee happens to serve in the South Carolina House. So we've got two strong realtor voices on this Accelerate Task Force to make sure that the needs of our industry are addressed. And of course, our staff is working closely with not only our two realtors on the committee, but the other business leaders as well. I think it's important that we look at how we open, because I was on a call with a group of New York brokers last week, and you would think that this would be the most gloomy conversation you could ever have with a group of New York City brokers. And it turned out to be one of the most enlightening conversations I've had in the last couple of weeks. They fully project when the turn comes, and that's the magic 8-ball question. Nobody knows when that's going to be, whether it's 6 months or 12 months from now. I don't think it's going to be longer than that. But when it turns, they see home ownership rates in this country climbing to the highest rates that they've ever been. They see citizens in New York buying second homes, shelter homes in states like South Carolina in a huge way. They also see a segment of New Yorkers and folks in other high dense cities moving into more open states like South Carolina. That's good and bad, right? Growth is usually good, but we have to properly manage that growth so that we preserve our quality of life here. But I expect, based on the information we're seeing, starting to see an uptick already in activity, that once consumers have the confidence that our government and our medical community have a handle on this crisis, that things are going to turn, and I think they're going to turn pretty quickly. In the meantime, one last thing I'll share with you, and then Michael, any other questions I'll be happy to address. We've got June primaries coming up. I talked with the Speaker of the House last week. There is no delay in the June election primaries in South Carolina. They are going to go forward. We're going to make a big push with our members to explain how you get absentee ballots especially for those that are elderly and still may be at risk as we go into June. And we've got a big PAC meeting this week. Michael Sally is your state RPAC chairman, as you probably know. And every House seat is up for election. Every Senate seat is up for election. And there are probably of the 170 seats, there are probably only 20 or 30 that are really contested. And oddly enough, a large percentage of those are in the Charleston area. We have a lot of friends that are running for re-election that have opposition. There are several open seats that are out there. Paul Campbell, who's been a great business advocate, is retiring. His seat is wide open. A number of folks are running there. And so please make sure that you get engaged in your local politics. It's going to be very tough for challengers this election cycle because they can't host rallies and barbecues, and they can't even go knocking door to door, which is still the best way to win a House or Senate seat. So incumbents have a huge advantage going into this primary, but it's part of our overall outreach and part of our advocacy. If we don't get involved in politics, then we're not going to have friends when we need them, when the rubber hits the road on our legislative issues. So everything's connected. The dots always line up. And Mike, I could ramble on for a little while longer, but I won't.
Well, that's all right. I'll kind of direct you one or two more directions, and maybe we'll take a couple questions.
Sure.
You know, if anybody has them that they want to go ahead and put in the chat box. I agree with your point about some of the New England states, some of the more compacted, dense, you know, big city areas. Master from Charleston Central had that his uncle was looking at buying a second home somewhere in the Southeast. Relocation is always talked about. Some of the materials from leading real estate companies of the world and our national and international network of reaching out to and referring those moving regardless of whether they're moving to Charleston. Remember, you can refer a client or a friend or somebody in your family who's in New York who wants to buy a second home in New York or wants to buy something in the country in Connecticut. So you can actually make that referral and placement through the relocation as well and get paid on that because this is still a business and this is still your livelihood. Or obviously talking to people that might want somewhere as a quarantine home. That's a little interesting kind of new concept as well. You know, Nick, just briefly on two quick things. One, obviously the state is much more than Metro Charleston. So I didn't know if you wanted to maybe update everybody real quick on what you're seeing statewide. Is it playing out similar to what we're seeing here? Or are you seeing disproportionate impacts in certain parts of the state? You know, I know hopefully Boeing will be restarting soon, and I think the same with BMW, but I know those have big impacts in the upstate. So that would be question one. And then question two would also be, I didn't know if you wanted to comment both on what you were seeing with realtors throughout the state, whether on receipt of PPP funds for those who have applied, or if you've seen realtors going the unemployment assistance route. I know those are two different questions, but I figured I'd put those out there and then let you kind of comment on them.
So unfortunately, the longer this crisis drags on, the more political it's going to become. We're going to see this divisive Congress really go nuts in the next 30 to 60 days over policies and programs and funding. It's going to be a nightmare. And what we're seeing at the local level, you've got mayors that are Republican, mayors that are Democrat, and you're seeing different policy approaches to how they're handling their communities and their businesses. And obviously everyone that's a Democrat is trying to score points against the governor. The Republicans are trying to try to score points with the governor. And it's a little different from market to market. What we've seen is Greenville's activity in the upstate has been a little bit stronger than the rest of the state. The Midlands is always kind of in neutral territory. Everybody is down, but as Michael mentioned at the beginning, you know, if you ask the average Joe, they'll tell you, you know, we're down, you know, 20 or 30%, but when the numbers are actually still in the teens in most places. We'll have our April statewide numbers in about another week, and so I'll have a better picture. Membership-wise, we're at over 24,000 realtors statewide, the highest number of realtors ever in South Carolina. That's, you know, good and bad depending on how that works for you. There are 54,000 licensees in South Carolina. And just check out your local MLS statistics. I mean, you know that even in a regular market, a very large percentage of those real estate agents don't do any business, little or any business. And it's not, the numbers aren't playing out that different when the economy slows down. So from that standpoint, I do think we're going to see some tough numbers for May and June, but I see pending starting to increase, which looks good for July and August. And so I think we're going to make the turn okay. The Real Estate Commission has not been issuing any new licensees because their testing centers have been shut down. Those will be back open this week, supposedly May 1st. Of course, they've delayed license renewals and CE renewals until September. So we won't really see if there have been any major drop-offs in the licensee count until a little bit later this fall.
Great. And you know, anything you're seeing on either unemployment side for the independent contractors, which I do know are eligible, or on the PPP that you've heard of anecdotally? And I know it's a tough process. We've already kind of talked about the process, but I just didn't know if you've heard of you know, if there's one route people are going, or people who have been approved or gone through those.
I've never gotten more phone calls about anything in my career than unemployment assistance. And some of you may know my wife runs a restaurant with 40 employees, and she's very familiar with the unemployment process as an employer. And she's been my go-to expert for the last 3 weeks as I've learned more about this. This afternoon, we have a webinar with Todd Timmons. He's general counsel for DO. That's going to be, I think, very enlightening for our members. It's been an extremely difficult process. I know of one realtor that has received PUA assistance from DO on Friday when they launched the funding. But for the overwhelming majority, they can't get through the application process. And so we're hoping to have those questions answered this afternoon. I have heard from many realtors that successfully applied for PPP during the first round and received their funding prior to it running out the first time. And I know there are even more that are in the pipeline for this second round, but I'm afraid many of them are going to be a little too late. Because if you're applying now for PPP funds, you're probably going to be at the end of the line unless you've got a really great lender.
Sure. What time is that webinar this afternoon? And that's going to focus on what?
It's at 2:00, and it's going to talk. Todd Timmons is going to explain how an independent contractor files for unemployment. And
Right.
I'll put the link in the chat box here. So if you want to register, please click on the link and register.
That'd be great. And we'll send it out company-wide as well so that people will have it if you don't get out of the chat box. So we've got time probably for about a question or two. If anybody wants to put those into the chat box and you've got one that you'd like to ask Nick. You know, Nick, while we're getting some of those questions come in, do our people in Columbia play any role with lobbying for South Carolina football this fall? As far as the season going forward, or is that something that's outside your purview?
I don't know. You know, Kaki and I have been talking about this. We're not really sure what's going to happen. I think we may see football happen, but with no fans in the stands. I do know that some other major sporting events are planning to renew their seasons later in the fall, but with limited or smaller or no fan base, but no official word. I'm hoping to get Kaki on a Zoom meeting here soon so I can get it straight from him.
Well, I did. We're gonna, once we finish up, if we don't have any questions come through, and I've got one, but once we finish up, we're gonna talk a little bit about adapting to change. And I do know there was one farm where you could pay a llama $100 to appear on your Zoom meeting. So they just put the camera right, and pulled the llama right up to the rail, and I'm not sure who would pay for that. I didn't think that would be a good use of company funds, so I did not sign up for that. But I do think it'd be interesting just to log on, have a llama in the middle of the screen.
So we have a couple of questions about evictions. The current court-ordered moratorium is through May 1st. I fully expect that to be extended to mirror the rent restrictions, the eviction restrictions that are in the CARES Act. So I would expect court proceedings to be halted at least through the middle of May, if not through the end of May. But we'll hear more from the court administration later this week.
And Nick, there was another question about the forgivability of PPP for independent contractors.
Yeah, if you successfully receive the funding, 75% of that has to be spent on payroll. The other 25% can be used for other business expenses. There's a list in the guidelines, and as long as you spend that money that way over that 8-week period that you have it, then it's fully refundable. It's a great program for anybody that's been impacted by this crisis.
Great. Any other questions that we saw come through from Nick? I didn't see any others, other than apparently a lot of people are looking to have baseball back. But we'll see.
Yeah, and for all the unemployment questions that I see in the chat, please check in to the webinar this afternoon. And if your questions are not answered on that webinar, I'll put my email address in here. Please email me directly afterwards, and we'll get the answers for you.
I don't want to the same as kind of all of your brokers or I've said, I don't want to commit, Nick, to something that is unrealistic. So please, if you have something that can wait till work hours, do. But Nick, I did want to give you a shout out. There was a comment early on that someone had an issue over this weekend and reached out to you, and I know you got back to them. And we certainly appreciate your accessibility. I've enjoyed watching you from your backyard as you help educate us as to what's going on. Now I guess we switched from outside to inside your office. But we certainly appreciate your leadership guidance and looking out for all of us collectively as we move through this. So I thank you for that. And, on behalf of all of our agents and the 380 people that have been on this call today, and for everything that you guys continue to do on our side.
Well, it's a team effort. Nothing we do at the State Association could be possible without our realtor member involvement and support. We don't do things on our own. I've got a great team. We've got great leadership, and as far as appreciate the kind words. My mom and dad were Greek immigrants who came to this country, and they taught me a lot of things. The one thing they taught me is that love the work that you do, love the people you work with, and work hard. And realtors, they don't work 9-to-5 jobs. And I do everything I can to make sure that our staff is accessible, because I know a lot of you, your best work comes on the weekends. If John Settle isn't in a turkey blind, he's serving his clients on the weekends. And I want to make sure that we are as available and as accessible. We want to have our own lives too, but I mentioned, my wife being an entrepreneur herself and growing up working in my dad's restaurant. I know I know that tough times don't last, but tough people do. And working together and with your support, I'm confident that we are going to see some of the best years ever ahead for us in real estate. Absolutely.
So we appreciate your time being here, Nick. We're always happy for any updates. And as we continue these, I'm going to talk a little bit about adapting. But one of the things we've learned through this is obviously that we don't need to be slow to adapt new technology. This might be, to hear from Nick or someone like Nick, something we may have waited for a company meeting on that may have taken us a lot longer to do. As Dave Sansom had said, it wouldn't be nearly as intimate where we're able to have these conversations with 400 people, but it seems like, at least to me, that Nick's speaking to each of us directly. And so some of the things that have come out of this out of necessity are going to be better. And there's nothing more than I would love on whether it's a quarterly or semi-annual basis, to have, Nick be able to address our company in settings like this. That's a lot more doable than, trying to make sure he can make the trade show date or the company date. So I appreciate that, Nick. We've got a few minutes left. Want to make sure that we finish on time. But I did email everybody out asking, obviously, what do you have in common with the Alaskan wood frog, which always, my emails make John Grasillo laugh sometimes, and I appreciate the support. And, we talk about adaptability. Shockingly, it's amazing what you can find on the internet. But the Alaskan wood frog, 60% of its body freezes solid in the winter because the temperatures are negative 80 degrees. Actually, its heart stops beating and it stops breathing. But you know what? When spring comes and it warms up, its body thaws out, it comes back to life, and it goes on living. And, I'm very happy with where our market has been, considering what I feared we could have done down sales-wise a month ago. So I'm certainly not saying that our hearts have stopped beating or we've stopped breathing by any means, but we all have had to adapt to the changes around us. And those changes can be, or those adaptations that we see in nature are great examples to point to, and they can be kind of extreme too. So you see people doing what they've got to do to adapt. The other one that I thought was interesting, and don't ask me why, it's all about frogs, but there's a Central American species of frog that actually cracks its own toe bones and shoves the bone through its foot and uses the bone as a weapon to fight off predators. So you talk about adapting when you need to survive, and I'll put that South American frog up against anybody. So that little dude's tough. But so I've seen a lot of you guys obviously adapt not only to the way that we're, holding virtual open houses or virtual, annual reviews or listing appointments or discussions, or even to some of the things that we're doing right here on this very meeting to adapt to an opportunity where, for an hour each week over the last 3 weeks, we've been able to have a company-wide meeting and hopefully connect with one another in ways that we never did before. And so it's a great opportunity for us as well. And you see that when you look around the marketplace for companies large and small, whether it's companies converting to go and pickup services, whether it's Lan Ganstrom, whose wife Danielle is in the Coleman office, who started his own homemade, healthy, chef-made meals delivered to your home program called Healthy Time Meals. It's something that he talked about for a long time, but you know what, the timing was right now. And so he rolled that out a couple of weeks ago. I'm a customer, the food's great, but it's about adapting to the environment when, the restaurant that he's working at may be closed, obviously for take-in and maybe only taking out. So it's making those adoptions. It's Firefly Distillery making hand sanitizer, or shout out to Dave, a company that used to make hockey masks, making PPE equipment and converting there, or General Motors making ventilators. So adapting is huge. We've continued to look at those things. And again, like I said, things that we should have done before. Java with Johns is a great way to start and bookend your week. IT and marketing training on some of our programs and offerings so we understand them better. And we also build a content library available on the intranet that you can now go and watch a 30-minute video on the power of your technology bundle and why the website works for you, or what Agent Icon is, or any of those things, and things that will come out of this a lot better. Photography, Matterport, FireVibe, other things that are great tools. We've always had digital signature and things, but now you can't be slow to adopt. You need to be on the forefront of adopting those things on an ongoing basis. But we also have to be cautious, because when you look, and I'll go back, and this isn't a frog example, but I'll go back, when you look to nature and when you look to animals for how they adapted to their environment. You know, one of the fears is, and I put that term in quotation marks, is something like the possum. You know, so, you know, a possum can roll over and play dead, but it's important to know that's not a decision the possum makes. That's actually an involuntary response caused by fear. So when that possum gets scared, his body involuntarily shuts down and he plays dead. You want to make it even more graphic, he also emits an odor that makes him smell dead. But that's not a decision he's making, it's an involuntary response. And if we don't adapt as to how we do business and how we communicate and how we serve our clients, the other side, and it's one of the reasons I'm not criticizing anyone else out there who may have other obligations or other companies, but it's one of the reasons we're outpacing the market, is because there is the risk of that involuntary paralysis that makes us end up doing nothing. And if we end up doing that, then, you know, we suffer the consequences and our clients don't see us as the expert, and you know, we don't have the opportunity to serve them more so now than ever, where they're going to need you and look to you to be the expert. I do appreciate Rusty changing the background screen of his Zoom meeting to a frog. He kind of looks like the Tiger King sitting back there with this giant frog behind him, but I see he moved to the side to make sure that I would notice that. But even that, I mean, I appreciate Hannah set up this great background for me on the Zoom meeting. So, I mean, we're learning all kinds of different things that we never knew before, but we got to make sure that, unlike the possum, we don't get scared into inaction. I'd rather be the tree frog that's jutting its bones out of its skin to use as weapon. But so the last couple of weeks, we're right on the end of our time. I appreciate everybody being here. We've ended with a quote the last couple of weeks, so I'm going to stick with that. And this time it's from Charles Darwin. Last time it was from Kobe Bryant. But sticking with the adaptation theme, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor is it the most intelligent. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. And so I think as we move forward through this, there you go, Nick's on a beach now. As we move forward through this, you know, I know that we will continue to adapt and move forward and look forward to, you know, moving through this onto the other side and seeing the great summer and fall that we're going to have. Even if it's different, it'll be great. So I appreciate everybody being here. Next week, we have Steve Murray, who's the president of Real Trends, national real estate organization that I think many of you have heard from before, that's going to be joining us. In 2 weeks, we've got Larry Kendall from Ninja Selling and the group. And then in 3 weeks, we've got Paul Boomsma, who's the president and CEO of leading real estate companies of the world. So I look forward to seeing everybody next Tuesday at 10. Nick, again, thank you very much for being here, for all that you're doing, and hope everybody has a great week. So thanks for being here.
Thanks very much, Nick.